All right. So, welcome everyone to StatTech Research Seminar on Measuring Progress. Today we welcome Professor Nuno, Dr. Nuno Nunez. But before introducing Nuno, I'd like to say a few words about the seminar series. Also, I'd like to remind you that we're recording today's event, which we'll make available online for future references. For those of you who don't know me, I am Kelsey O'Connor, one of the organizers at StatTech Research, the research division of StatTech, which is Luxembourg's official institute for statistics and economic studies. Our other organizers, Chiara Peroni and Francesco Saracino, are also in the meeting or will be joining momentarily. For the others, welcome back. We're happy to have you, especially Friday afternoon. As many of you know, there's a growing consensus that the current default measures of progress are insufficient. StatTech Research and many other organizations around the world agree on this. How then should we promote progress, broadly defined? What measures or measure should we target? Happiness, well-being, and quality of life studies provide a direction. This seminar series is dedicated to these studies. We will invite researchers from various fields to discuss their well-being research and the occasional practitioner. But to be precise, we will not always discuss progress, but we do focus on well-being, especially its causes and consequences. The speakers will present their current research, meaning the material will often be technical, but we've also asked them to provide context and to focus on the substance more than the method. And of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask, although we'll keep them mostly to the end. A couple more small things before getting started. We'll periodically update the website with the current schedule and recordings of past talks, so we'll make this one available probably next week. And as for organization, we have 1 hour, of which the last 15 minutes will be reserved for questions and answers. At this time, please raise your virtual hand or write in the chat box. You may, of course, use the chat box at any time. If there are any clarifying questions, we'll try to address them right away. Lastly, please keep your microphones muted to reduce the background noise. And now to welcome Professor Nuno Nunez. Nuno Nunez is a researcher at the Center for Research and Studies in Sociology and guest professor in the School of Sociology and Public Policies, both at the University Institute of Lisbon, Iscte-IUL, Portugal. He's a member of the Observatory of Inequality and the coordinator of the team in charge of the National Research Stream, Social Classes, Inequalities, and Public Policies of the Portuguese Sociological Association. He participates or has participated in 9 research-funded projects and currently is a national advisor for Horizon Europe. Nuno has more than 50 publications in peer-reviewed journals, academic books, or as reports, including 2 books, and has given more than 100 talks. He works on the subjects of inequality, class, collective action, work, education, well-being, sustainable development, the welfare state, public policies, digital society, and artificial intelligence. Quite a few things. Today, he speaks on behalf, however, of the project members of Territories of Inequality and Well-being, which includes Rosario Maria do Carmo Botelho, Daniela Cavero, Sarah Silva, and Luis Cabrita. The project is conducted in the Research Center for CIES ISCTE. And without further ado, Nuno, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Kelsey, for your words. It's a real pleasure to be here to present our work. This is a collective work of a team led by Rosario Mariti, as you said. She's the coordinator of this project. And she is with us together, and they are also present, Maria do Carmo Botelho, Daniela Craveiro, Sara Silva, and Luis Cabrita. We all belong to CIES, Kelsey, CIES, an international research center specialized in sociology and other social science that belong to Iscte, University Institute of Lisbon. We are proud to be part of an institution that since its foundation at almost 50 years ago has earned the international expertise recognition in the study of social inequalities. I will present now we have a PowerPoint presentation. I think you are seeing the presentation. So the title of our presentation is Inequalities and Well-being in Portugal, monitoring through a local system of indicators for Europe. Economic performance indicators are necessary, but insufficient in measuring the social progress of societies. It is in answer to these that OECD have suggested the adoption of a multidimensional perspective that includes the different parameters of well-being. And under this scope, in 2011, OECD raised the OECD Better Life Initiative. It is the OECD Better Life Initiative which has been playing a key role in advancing the Beyond GDP agenda, clarifies that relying on growth alone is not an adequate solution to address the key global challenge identified in the United Nations 2013 agenda. The research that we present today aims to understand the relations between social inequalities and well-being under the conceptual framework of the OECD Better Life Initiative by applying it in different municipalities of Portugal, and to propose a comparable system of indicators that allows the discussion of public policies for achieving well-being of different populations at local levels. Inequality and well-being are central concerns in today's world, and two interlinked paradigms, both fundamental to increase the knowledge of contemporary societies and their current challenges. The paradigms of inequality and well-being are giving way to new ways of looking at the world, their social relations, and the way we should inhabit the planet. In the aftermath of the financial and pandemic crisis, neoliberalism and its ideology of free and deregulated market based on a minimal state is confronted with other development alternatives, not exclusively based on economic growth. That is, in this current economic growth is propelling an accentuation of wealth and income inequalities. The paradigmatic look at inequalities and well-being supports new angles of analysis on the European social space and its constituent countries, on the future of Europe and current European integration, on the living conditions and opportunities of citizens within each European countries. The main dynamics of contemporary societies are crossed by multiple social inequalities, such as social class, income, education, gender, age, locality, and nationality, among other categorical and distributional inequalities. All these social inequalities are multidimensional, very often intersect with each other and are systemic and cumulative, crossing the institutions of work, family, welfare, and fundamentally framing the current conditions of human, social, and sustainable development. The long tradition of multidisciplinary theories of well-being are now dealing with the global demands that the 2013 United Nations Agenda is putting on this concept, opening up social scientific opportunities to develop even more its scope. Recent studies emphasize that inequality constrains well-being, namely through the scientific work of Sen, Wilkinson and Pickett, Joseph Stiglitz, Fitoussi and Duran, and by the international organization OECD, but the findings are mostly supported by analyses between countries that do not take into consideration inequalities within countries and their specific place-based scope. Our conceptual model considers how inequalities of class, income, educational, gender, age, territorial, and of recognition influences the following dimensions of well-being. So this is our conceptual model. The roots are our main dimensions of inequality that we are trying to analyze. And this analytical model that looks to well-being is mostly supported on the OECD Better Life Index. Our main dimensions of well-being are decent work, work-life balance, health, quality of education and culture, digital society, climate change, housing, participation and governance, social connections, safety, and subjective well-being. The objects of study are enriched when they articulate multiple analytical scales. Such scales of analysis allow a denser discussion between theories and indicators through the critical confrontation that they raise between limits and potentialities. The European social space and its underlying inequality structure, a decisive perspective for understanding the current challenge and directions of the future of Europe, is best understood by equating the relationships between inequality and well-being at local, regional, national, and transnational scales. This multi-scaling perspective constitutes a fruitful way of understanding the variations in inequality and well-being in various territories, as well as the profound causes and consequences that link them together. In the study carried out, we sought to understand to what extent social inequalities, very marked in the Portuguese society, are associated with the levels of well-being and living conditions of populations in the territories. Deepening the analysis on well-being, taking into consideration the constraints arising from social inequalities through a perspective that incorporates the vision of the populations in the territories, the place-based view is a decisive challenge, often not so considerate even due to the length and complex research it involves. Now we would like to present an overview of the TIWELL project, and then we will focus on our main theme in this conference. So in our project that is called TIWELL project, Territories of Inequality and Well-being, in this project we had three main objectives: to provide a theoretical, informed, analytical capacity to a multidimensional well-being approach, to analyze territorial inequalities and their relationships with the well-being of Europeans, and to build a system of indicators at local, regional, and European levels. Methodologically, the TIWELL project was supported on data from official statistics, regional and municipal statistics, and from census. Cross-sectional microdata from European Social Survey of 2006, official documents from municipalities, and digital social systematic observation. We developed a mixed methods approach, and for us, this was very important. Supported on quantitative analysis of the data that we have already mentioned, the sources that I mentioned, and supported also in qualitative analysis through documentary analysis, interviews, and focus groups. Several digital tools were mobilized as SPSS, Tableau, MaxKDA, and Google View. Statistical analysis was supported in exploratory analysis and association measures and several multivariate methods, namely exploratory linear and nonlinear factor analysis, multiple component analysis, hierarchical and non-hierarchical cluster analysis, multiple linear regression models, and multiple logistic models. In this panel, we summarize the several steps that the project has taken in along about 2 years and a half. This is only a broad view of the various phases that we had dealing. Now, as I mentioned before, let's focus on the purpose, the main purpose in this seminar. So this seminar in this seminar, we aim to present new knowledge about the relations between inequality and well-being under the frameworks of OECD Better Life Initiative, in the case of Portugal, and their municipalities in an exploratory perspective. Based on the OECD's well-being model, a system of well-being as well as inequality indicator has been created, based on official statistics at regional and municipal levels. The methodological options followed, using Portugal as a case study, are intended to enable replication to other European countries, and it's perfectly feasible and allows for within and between country analysis on inequalities and well-being. Now, some methodological remarks. The present work, and methodologically, our aims involves creating a comparable system of place-based inequality and well-being indicators based on OECD Better Initiative, identify different territorial clusters in Portugal according to inequalities for the selection of 5 case studies. We have selected 5 case studies to characterize inequalities and well-being in territorial clusters, analyze the relationships between inequalities and well-being at municipal and national levels. And the data comes from mainly Statistics Portugal. Official statistics were used at national and municipal level. And we had collected also data from Census 2001 and 2006, and municipal statistics from 2016. Complementary, other sources were used, such as Social Security, the Housing and Urban Rehabilitation Institute, the General Directorate of Education and Science Statistics, the General Directorate of Education, and Rutish Senior University Network. We have analyzed a municipal database composed of 275 local counties from mainland Portugal, all the municipalities of mainland Portugal. For social inequalities, a selection of indicators was made at the municipal level. A database of Portuguese municipalities was created with these indicators. The social class indicator was created, and some indicators were created to reflect variations between census 2001 and 2011 using rate of change. For example, the variation in residents with higher education or the variation in population density in the municipality. For well-being, 78 indicators were selected, distributed in 10 dimensions. The interdependencies between indicators in each dimension were evaluated using exploratory principal component analysis. To measure each well-being dimension, several composite indicators were created and others were kept original. To analyze the relationships between inequality and well-being in each dimension, association measures were calculated and multivariate regression models were constructed by well-being indicators, in which the set of social inequality indicators are taken as independent variables with values per municipality. Now, I will present the main indicators that were mobilized. Here we have the local indicators that allow us to measure several types of inequalities: territorial inequalities, population indicators, income inequalities, and other several indicators of income inequalities were also mobilized in the analysis later. The ACM typologies of class that guide us, and several indicators of education, schooling, and mobility, and also indicators of mobility. Here we have a complex framework of local indicators for measuring well-being, several indicators. Because I have always talked about 20 minutes, I will skip the main explanation of all of that. But decent work involves indicators of precarity, social security, unemployment, the concentration of business volume of the 4 largest companies, for instance. Housing, we have indicators of affordable housing, overcrowding, and social housing. Here we have indicators, we have collected indicators of healthcare regarding doctors, nurses, health centers, pharmacies, mortality rate, life expectancy, about environmental quality, the use of public transport, waste management, landfill and water quality, car fuel consumption, and investments in biodiversity and landscape. In work-life balance, we have also mobilized some indicators, but this indicator has some fragilities, as we will see later. Let me drink just a little of water. Sorry. And also indicators of education, culture, and digital society, participation in education, school success, and investments, local investments in cultural and recreation. For civic engagement and governance, also apathy towards national and European politics, apathy towards municipal politics, a municipal transparency index. In social connections, we have indicators about expenditure in sport activities, sport association, the isolation and of elderly people, their support networks, their occupational activities, and also education services. So this was the framework, the theoretical and methodological framework of our analysis. So let's see some results that we would like to share with you. In Southern Europe and in European context, Portugal is at the same time one of the most unequal countries, and regarding well-being standards, also it's a challenging country. Portuguese society is crossed by territorial configurations of inequality that influence multiple dimensions of local well-being. So the country is formed by 5 territorial configurations that I will present, that were formed, that are the results from complex intersections between class inequality, educational inequalities, age, income inequalities, and demographic densities. So here we have the industrial territories of inequalities, the industrial territories in transition. This configuration reveals a specific geographic location integrated in a complex of historically consolidated economic relations of international and national division of labor. In this configuration of territories, production models that require low-skilled labor continues to be reproduced. However, they are territories in transition due to the growing schooling of young people and the capacity to retain the population, facilitated by the increasing proximity to the main metropolitan axis of the North and Central Coast. Another configuration, territorial configuration, which reflect the intermediate territories, which reflect greater economic, geographical, and spatial heterogeneity, which is prevalent in the country and which is close to the national average in a more aggregated characterization of mainland Portugal. But simultaneously, they are territories characterized by the intersection of net population losses, intensified aging, and the relative incapacity to requalify the population and the social professional structure. I have to go ahead because I'm running out of time. Urban network territories In these territories, the challenge of mobility, demographic growth, vulnerability, and social exclusion are the ones more pressing. So these territories are formed by a dense urban net involving large and medium-sized cities and by intense daily mobility relations between municipalities that show potential for demographic growth along the young, working population, and elderly age groups. Their economic fabric is more located in the tertiary sector, and therefore the routines, employees, and the professional managers stand out in the social class structure. Innovative territories and the previous one share a set of challenges related to social inequalities common to many metropolitan and global cities, coexisting in the same social spatial contiguity process of advanced and marginalized modernity using the concept of PACA. In the innovative territories, the presence of the knowledge society and its global integration into the digital society is highlighted with increased presence of entrepreneurs and executives and managers with powers and competence that bring them closer to the globalized economic, political, and cultural elite. This elite concentration process, which decisively impacts on class structures and their spatial dynamics, concentrates multiple resources and empowers the territories, generating private and public goods that are reflected in the dynamics of well-being. But these resources are unequally distributed and without the capacity to decisively alter the phenomenon of peripheralization, stigmatization, and vulnerability located in certain urban neighborhoods or ghettos. So in this type of territory, class differences are more pronounced, income inequalities are the highest in the countries, purchasing power is distinctive, and access to housing is more difficult. Finally, the low density territories. These are territories that are facing depopulation, aging, the lack of job opportunities that dictate constant exodus of the young and adult population, impoverishment with the strong presence of an inactive population, predominantly with basic education or no education at all, economic bottlenecks, and the inability to retain human resources that generate employment and stable life project. And this is a territory that must be taken into account from a perspective of social cohesion. So we have analyzed these five clusters, these five types of configurational territorial these five Portuguese territorial configuration, and understand how well-being behaves in these territories. In the industrial territories in transition, the presence of larger companies and high activity rates, despite low wages, mitigates precariousness and social security in sickness, resulting from the educational transition that these territories are experiencing. There is a high success rate in primary and secondary education, but in contrast with a lower participation in compulsory schooling, which means that this transition is not transversal to all segments of the population, whose explanation may in part be due to the historical heritage that the school-factory relationship inculcated on certain disadvantaged classes and fractions of classes. In these territories, waste management, landfill and water quality, and housing overcrowding and welfare are welfare concerns resulting from less public investment. But on the other hand, the strong density of social support networks are reflecting a better capacity to deal with the problem of isolation for the elderly. This is only an example of one kind of configurational territory, and but we have also an analysis for each type of the well-being, we have analyzed the well-being in each configuration, Portuguese territory configuration. Now we have also developed some models that try to understand the relation between some types of specific inequality and well-being, in a broader sense of the 278 municipalities of Portugal. So municipalities characterized by the predominance of rural areas show less well-being in the education, digital society, and higher education dimension, in the worst conditions of travel in public transport, and in the least participation in national and European politics. The most urbanized municipalities have lower welfare associated with reconciling work and family life, housing overcrowding, and a higher incidence of crime. In municipalities characterized by the presence of medium-sized urban areas, the well-being challenges are related to lower life expectancy at 65 years old, lower internet use and participation in higher education, difficulties in using public transport, apathy towards national and European politics, and higher severity of road accidents. The lower well-being associated with population density highlights factors that refer to the conditions of access to health infrastructure in the lower relative expenditure per inhabitant on cultural activities, in the greater unavailability of social housing, in the difficulties associated with support networks for the elderly, less current expenses of municipalities in sports associations, and in more victims of domestic violence. Population aging trends in municipalities are associated with specific welfare challenges in human resources for health, support networks for the elderly population, and lower civic participations. The context where we observe a greater increase in the 0-14 age segment deal with increased challenge to well-being in the components of precariousness, work-family balance, participation in compulsory schooling, access to housing, and support networks, and isolation of other people. Is mobility related to well-being? It's also possible to observe the influence of inter-municipal mobility for reasons of study or work on the configurations of well-being in the municipalities. Mobility points to increased well-being challenges in the weaker working conditions in the municipality of residence, work-life balance, and availability of specialized human resources in health. So we have here several challenges related to mobility with what regards to well-being. Are income inequalities related to well-being? The distribution of income indicators measured by several indicators highlights the effects of income cleavage on the lower well-being of populations in municipalities. These effects are particularly evidenced by more fragile organizational contexts, marked by greater precariousness and unemployment, where retirement and unemployment protection systems have a more limited action. Specifically, the incidence of poverty is associated with the presence of lower well-being in the dimensions of education, with regard to municipal expenditures in cultural and recreational activities, the environmental quality of landfills, lower presence of local resource for civic participation, and apathy towards municipal politics, as well as greater isolation of the elderly and deficient elderly support networks. Are class inequalities related to well-being? what we see is that the presence of entrepreneurs and executives appears associated with greater well-being in the dimensions of decent work, with regard to a more robust organization context, larger companies and lower unemployment, better work-family balance, less housing overcrowding, more intense civic participation at the level of local participation, and less crime. The higher presence of the social class of professional and manager has configuration of greater well-being in the dimension of decent work, namely lower unemployment, higher life expectancy at 65, more school success, and the use of personal transport is more intensified instead of public transport. The well-being linked to the presence of industrial workers highlight indecent work, challenge linked to economic dependence on the largest company in the municipality, in health, the limited availability of specialized human resource, in education, difficulties in access to the digital society and to higher education, and in participation in compulsory schooling as a social class where the public transport prevails in terms of mobility. As we have also, and before concluding, sorry if I using more time that we combined.
You still have some time, so no problem. You know.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, thank you. So
say five minutes. Let's say. Yeah.
Can I have 10? You don't mind?
10 minutes gives us 10 minutes for Q&A. So I leave it to you to decide.
Okay, but okay, I will skip this one. But educational inequalities are also related to well-being. It's an important dimension that is related to well-being. And these are several indicators that express that. We can talk better later. To conclude, a look inside Portugal and at a set of municipal regularities reveals a deeply asymmetric and discontinuous country that is experiencing marked inequalities in terms of well-being. The demographic structure in an increasingly aging country, where the segment of children and young people has been decreasing, reveals the consequences of a territorial competitiveness that tends to benefit, above all, the economic dynamics of the metropolitan areas, with obvious losses for the most depopulated territories. A look at Portuguese municipalities reveals relevant difference between the distribution of social classes, dualizing on one hand municipalities with a greater presence of more favored classes and other territories with where is more prevailing most defavored working class territorial inequalities accentuate the dynamics of democratic decline. It is the most educated who leave their low density municipalities in search of better life and work opportunities, and the opportunities of the digital society are not territorial uniform. The schooling and the qualification of population in the territories is today a distinctive factor in demographic, economic, and social inclusion or exclusion dynamics. Families with children, it's also a group that is very important to take in mind. It's associated with several dimensions of well-being. We would like to say that income inequality, which are higher in predominantly urban areas, undermine the decent work agenda with a higher incidence of precarious and unemployment. Sorry. The more The more unequal territories influence interest in politics. That's also a conclusion. There are processes of concentration of supply of infrastructures and services, as well as a differentiated occupation and maintenance of public space. There are also different infrastructure between central and peripheral parish. So, which policies of well-being? Decent work is not a territorial homogeneous realities. The territories are home to different types of business that generate employment that is variable, qualified, paid, and stable. Work-life balance is conducive to better well-being in medium-sized urban and rural territories, with margins for local governments to improve its investment in support infrastructures, public spaces, education, health, sport, and leisure. In health, there is still much to be done for the population by creating facilities and spaces for leisure that are conducive to the practice of sports and health living habits, and also fostering opportunities to create meaningful ties and sociabilities between generations. Portugal is a country that needs several investments in health. I'm always finished. In education, territories lose territorial competitiveness the further they distance themselves from networks of higher education institutions and from technological and digital innovation hubs. There are also very problems in urban space of mobility and commuting. There are also problems, deep problems about economic fabric, especially in low density territories. We had pointed several problems, several statistical future work to be done. We have lack of information on decisive indicators to understand relevant components of well-being. We will mention some of them that we think are more important. The indicator number of health life years at age 65. The work-life balance, it's a very important indicator that needs to be more, needs more investment in statistics. Also the time that people spend traveling to the workplace, the distance problems of mobility, the type of work that is emerging with teleworking, for instance, and also the understanding, the statistical understanding of several support structures and service that several groups need. And also, almost to conclude, the need to diversify and the need to invest in sport offer, cultural offer in the local areas. Finally, and I would like to remark some recommendations from, I'm always finished, Kelsey. Sorry for more 1 or 2 minutes. Recommendation of Joseph Stiglitz that is pointing into the same direction that we are pointing. So these recommendations are very important for improve and understand social inequality and especially well-being in Europe. This is a very recent work published by OECD. And for us also, it's very important, the SDG agenda. We have not been working directly on that, but our goal is to reach that agenda and to enrich their methodological, their empirical work, because we feel we are it is a constraint to have very aggregated indicators that don't go to several scales of analysis in countries, and that's a problem that the SDG agenda should take seriously in consideration. Because Without that, and we know, and all of us know the importance of this agenda, we have to have the best instruments to reach the goals until 2020. Sorry for having spent more time and very sorry.
No problem. No problem at all. Thank you very much for the presentation. There's a huge amount of information there. Imagine it was difficult to put it all into the slides that you have. We will open up the floor for questions. Please feel free to either raise your hand or go to the chat, and we can call on you. You can ask the question yourself, or we can read the questions off from the chat box. Looks like so far we don't have anybody. I will try to keep track here. And my first question then for you, just take the prerogative as the host. So I completely agree with one of your last statements, which is that it's really important to have these local indicators to actually be able to implement the insights from the research. So I'm hopeful for the agenda, and I want to know, have you had any attention paid to you in this project by policymakers, local governments? Is anybody listening? I know this is new. You guys just finished the project, but has anybody responded so far?
Okay, thank you, Kelsey. I don't know if my colleagues want to answer because I have spoken too much. I don't know.
But so far, nobody knows the results of our project because we are waiting for our sponsor to allow us to disseminate the results. But during the local, the place-based research, we contact the local politics, and they follow us and participates in a focus group and in interviews. So they know they are doing this study, and they are waiting for us to know the results.
Right. So we have one question so far in the chat, and it's from Masoud Badri. Masoud, if you'd like, you can unmute yourself and ask, or if you'd like, I can do it for you.
Yes, because it's a very wonderful question. If you could.
Okay. In fact, Nuno, you feel free to just respond to them.
No, I would like to hear.
Oh, okay, sure. And he hasn't chimed in yet, so I suggest you go ahead and
okay. So the first question, I think it's about. I don't see it on my sheet.
Yeah, so it's quite straightforward. So how much is GDP responsible for inequalities? And maybe if I interpret this slightly further, so maybe GDP growth, unequal GDP growth, perhaps.
Okay, thank you for the question because it's a very important question to be asked, and I think it's responsible. At least it's responsible for some types of inequality, and that's the main one of the main arguments about the work of Thomas Piketty. We have the problem. It's not economic growth. The problem it's the way the current economic growth is shared through social groups in countries. The realities are very complex. We can't say that we see some trends. The work of Piketty is very understanding on that, but we are not suggesting that we should minimize GDP. No, what we are saying is that we need another measures to understand well-being, and the best way of do science is to use all the best instruments that we have, and also GDP. We haven't do that because others have been doing, but I think I had answer. I don't know if my colleagues want to ask to say something to complement my answer.
About GDP, we have problems with GDP because sometimes especially in the regions that most of the people are out of the work, we think that GDP doesn't involve everybody, so they are under evaluate. In the extreme of the distribution, and that's a problem for us. That's why we need to link GDP with the other measures.
Yeah, that makes sense. We have a question from Francesco. He's one of our co-organizers. Francesco, if you want.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. Thanks a lot for the presentation. My question is basically whether it is possible, if you have considered doing so, to include measures of environmental output among your output. So basically, the question that I have in mind is whether and how various measures of inequality affect environmental quality.
Okay. I don't know if you, some of my colleagues want to answer. I cannot answer, but I don't know.
You can answer, Nuno, and I have, I think, a significant remark in more depreciate rural areas. The politics said that one of the most interesting things they can offer to the enterprise that the enterprise can do pollutions and things like that because they have space to, and doesn't matter. So it's a contradiction, and I think it's necessary to analyze deeper this kind of politics. And Nuno.
Okay, thank you, Rosario. Yes, I think you just said almost everything. Actually, we have used some indicators of environmental quality, and they point that the influence of sometimes the influence of social inequalities in quality environmental, but for us this is a very important challenge, and because some work we have some work that try to understand these relations between social inequalities and climate change or environmental quality. The work of Lucas Chantel is one of the best, and I think we social scientists should invest more in this, also in indicators, also in look to better problematize these relations between inequalities, social inequalities, and the environment.
Let me add, please. Let me add some information. The environmental indicators that we used it because they are available at the municipality unit. So at this level. Some of them we find at the regional level or national level. Some of them with some perceptions. These are objective indicators, and we used according to the level of analysis.
Yeah, it sounds like a major challenge, which I would come to maybe if we had more time. So we're slowing, we only have a few minutes left, so I'll skip my question for the moment. We have one from Ashley B. Ashley, if you would like to ask your question, feel free.
Sure. I'm impressed with just the amount of work and aggregation that people had to study to get places. But we also know that there are parallel measures in the, as you alluded to in your last slide, with regards to the multidimensional capabilities approach, which also tries to disaggregate into a number of different dimensions. And so I was just wondering if you would apply the essentially at a place-based level, the multidimensional capabilities model, would you have derived in the end different conclusions than what you get using the OECD model? Because neither one of them is using subjective measures.
Do you want to answer or?
Well, for subjective measures, we in our work we try to use it. Some data from surveys like European Social Survey, for instance, and these have some subjective indicators. In a place-based base, we have some answers now. But we don't have here for these presentations only the results. But we have more results for some subjective yes. Rosário, não sei.
Yes, and at place-based level, in fact, we confirmed our model. Yes, and we have a lot of information, subjective informations, we linked with objective informations. We choose not to show you here today, but we have it. Yes. And we want to publish these results.
Great, thank you. I missed Ansha. She had her hand raised for a little while, so Ansha, feel free to chime in now.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the presentation. It's obvious that this was a lot of work. And my question is, as far as I understood, you only used objective indicators as a measure of well-being. Is that right?
No.
In this case, in this presentation, yes, but we have also subjective indicators, yes.
Okay, but I also wonder if it is maybe important to also consider perceptions. I mean, it's well known that perceptions differ quite a lot from the actual, for example, perception of inequality differs quite a lot of the actual inequality. So did you think about that, or did you include perceptions somehow?
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't.
Rosario, do you want to answer?
Yes, we don't have the perceptions in municipal indicators, but that's why we did interviews and discussion group, focus group to understand this kind of this perspective and try to link the subjective perspectives with the objective at local level. At the national level, our source, it was the ESS, the European Social Survey, and we did this kind of links. Yes.
Nice. Okay, thank you.
But it's very important, really, to have, as my colleague said, to have perceptions about those. Very, very important.
So I want to say thank you, everyone. It's now time. However, if Nuno is willing to stay on and anybody else would like to participate a little further, we have a couple more questions. Francesco has, okay, great. Thank you, Nuno.
Sure.
And your
Until
team.
6 o'clock, I could stay here.
Okay, sounds good. Francesco, feel free.
I propose that Maciej gets a shot before me, as I've already spoken. So Maciej, if you are there, please turn on your mic.
I propose I just read it out unless Maciej chimes in. So the question is, what do you think? How does local government social policies and or programs affect subjective well-being, whether local governments are effective in raising the happiness of citizens and reducing social inequalities.
I don't know if you don't mind, I could answer that, Rosario, Sara. I can. One of the, we will say that we answered that yes, local government social policy programs affect subjective well-being, yes. And if they are effective in raising the happiness of citizens and reducing social inequality, this is a more complex question. But for us, one of the next steps will be to understand the role of social state, the role of public policy, the way that local policies, public policies should.
I think.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, he froze.
We decide not to go through the deep analysis of the links between policies and inequalities and well-beings. Our sponsors ask us not to go through this way, but we want to go in a study that can compare Portugal with other European countries.
If everyone in this talk wants to work with us about that and share some ideas, we are open to challenging conversation, to challenging discussions about, because this is fascinating for us. This is the future, or Europe has to pass through this.
That actually leads quite well into Francesco's question, but in mine in a broader way. So you've based this so far on what looks like a cross-sectional data, 2016 for the ESS and the census. So can you tell us a little bit about, whether or not you can measure changes over time, what the project looks like when you might do this again? I imagine that's also partially changes over time. And then how this might be extended as well to the other countries. As you mentioned, this is a system of inequality indicators and well-being indicators that might be used elsewhere. So basically, where does this go next, and how does it change over time?
We didn't for this time. We tried to build the system of indicators. The next step is to build or to experiment this conceptual model, comparing, applying this model in other European countries as also in Portugal. So we are looking for you to work with us with this perspective, and we want also to improve a diachronic perspective, a historic perspective. Now, our work now, it was to build the system. Now we want to try and understand the evolution, the social progression, comparing Portugal and other European countries, not only at national level, but at regional level.
Yes, let me add, our methodology can be applied to another countries, because we built this methodology to be used in another regions, so we can use it for another countries. But over time, now we choose to use only 1 year, but to select the system of indicator, as Rosario said. But over time, yes, we can support some of that system of indicators for some dimensions.
So perhaps, for example, every 5 years, I know some important inclusive wealth report is every 5 years, or at least it used to be. One thing I was thinking about, and I think in terms of subjective well-being, or kind of happiness, and I like having a single measure. Is there a way to trade off, say, work-life balance with income? is there something that you might try to do in the future to compare these different indicators of well-being to place more value on one versus another?
I don't understand you very well, Kelsey. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. So I'm wondering if there's a way to contrast different indicators. So right now you have a large set. Can you contrast? So one object might be good for work-life balance, but might be bad for employment or income. And in that case, how do you decide, is this a good thing or a bad thing?
Okay.
In fact, the way different indicators behavior, it's not always in the same. It depends on the general configurations of inequalities in each regions. That's why we start our project to build 5 clusters of territories which are compared and are different ones from the other. I don't know, I'm sorry about my English, but I tried to explain. So first we try to build different 5 regions. They are really different in their inequality configurations. Then we try to analyze, to deep analyze the impact of these different configurations of territories in well-being of populations. And work-life balance was one of the dimensions more difficult. We think that the indicators that most are used to monitoring this dimension are not enough, and we have a great, large article commenting special this dimension, work-life balance.
For us, it's not only a dimension; it's a multiple dimension.
Yes,
It's formed by multiple dimensions, so it's difficult to aggregate and to choose the indicators for the work-life balance, and is extremely subjective.
If I can add something, and probably I will also answering to Janče about if other European countries, if our framework is universal also for country in East Europe. I think we have to consider that no, I think we should take in mind, into consideration the structural, the cultural, and political and economic context of well-being. And to some, well-being is one thing, and to others could be another different thing. But in answering to you, Kelsey, I think that we, of course, in Europe, we have an harmonized systems of indicators, but of course, we could add other indicators. But for me, the theory and the need to go deeper in the conceptualization of well-being, it's also important for this discussion about indicators. And my perception, my knowledge for now is that probably we have to do some work. We and the scientific community in conceptualizing well-being today, currently. What that means in current society that we live on, that we are living.
And I completely agree. I think that this is perfect. The challenge for me is then, is what to do with it. For policymakers, even academics, because it's a lot of information that I think the general public would want distilled. And to push a little further, instead of work-life balance, if we thought of, imagine that there was a policy that is good for income, but bad for the environment. How do we decide?
That's a difficult question, but these are the challenges that we are facing today, right? And probably we should not need to be some binary in our options, in our public options. So I would say that if you could build a robust system of indicators that is not necessary, that shouldn't be universal, because if you want to apply to the standards of well-being in Canada, it's completely different from the standards of well-being in Bangladesh, or in India, or in Kiev, or in Tanzania. So I think we should always keep in mind these specificities. And your question goes also in that direction. And
I don't think the research are allowed to decide this kind of questions. We only analyze and build solutions, but at finally we must decide it's the populations, not. So we have to characterize the different perspectives, but at the end, it's not populations are allowed to decide what is the best for them.
Yes, actually, Mark Fabian is saying precisely that. That's a value judgment. The public will decide. Yeah. Do you need to point that? Yeah, sure. Because we are talking about their lives, right? And not about an abstract indicator that probably it's not the best way for us as individuals. I don't know.
Very good. So I can't disagree with the public should decide. How the public decides, that's a different question. But I thank you very much for it. It's a difficult question. Anybody else have any last minutes? We're a little over time, but it seems like there's still an opportunity if you have another question or comment. Okay, then I think I would just like to thank you very much for this wonderful introduction, I would say, because there's a lot of material there. And thank you for giving us this time and for spending the extra time to answer questions as well. I would just say one other thing. We have another talk coming up towards the end of October. You can check out our website. And I hope to see you there. It's going to be related in some ways. It's very aggregate, but it's on another indicator on the Happy Planet Index. And we have just a comment just saying thank you. Yes, so thank you very much. I hope to see you guys in the next seminars.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure was.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.